Hello, my name's Kerry and I'm a member of the MrBruff.com writing team. Today I'm going to talk about compound complex sentences. Let's begin with some quick revision. Here's a compound sentence. Miss Morstan seized my wrist and we all stood with thumping hearts. This sentence has two parts which make sense by themselves. Miss Morstan seized my wrist is the first, we all stood with thumping hearts is the second. Because these sentences make sense by themselves, they're called independent clauses. A compound sentence has two independent clauses, which are joined with a coordinating conjunction, often known as a fanboys conjunction, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, and we can see that and is here. Most of the time we have a comma before the conjunction, and the two ideas are of equal importance, which is why we have a figure of a person holding equally balanced scales. Let's read this complex sentence. We all stood with thumping hearts, straining our ears. I've taken this independent clause and pasted it here. Now it changes its name to the main clause because in a complex sentence there's only one clause that makes sense by itself. Straining our ears doesn't make sense by itself because it doesn't tell us who's straining their ears. Therefore it's called the subordinate clause or dependent clause because it's dependent on the ideas here for us to understand it. A complex sentence has one main clause and at least one subordinate clause, and the subordinate clauses are separated with commas. To make a compound complex sentence, we need a compound sentence and at least one subordinate clause. I've copied the compound sentence here, pasted it here, and the subordinate clause here, and pasted it here. Now we have a compound complex sentence. Miss Morstan seized my wrist, and we all stood with thumping hearts, straining our ears. The writer uses fast action words with seized and thumping hearts to develop the tension of that moment. But the subordinate clause at the end slows the pace down. The characters are listening for something, and that raises the tension even more. Let's look at an example now of subordinate clauses at the beginning of a compound complex sentence. This is adapted from A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. To see the dark cloud come drooping down, covering everything, one might have thought that nature lived nearby and was brewing on a large scale. The subject of both main clauses is nature, and because it's the same subject, we don't need to repeat it in the second independent clause. The two subordinate clauses mirror the fog slowly creeping up, and this creates an uncomfortable supernatural mood because Scrooge can't see what's coming towards him. The independent clauses that follow focus on the personification of nature. The word brewing creates the idea of a witch brewing spells, and this in turn creates an uneasy mood because trouble is literally brewing for Scrooge. Mood is the atmosphere suggested by the description of the surroundings. Tone refers to the speaker's feelings. This is adapted from The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. The speaker is thinking about his bad luck. He's travelled to the future in his time machine and lost it. Things are now going horribly wrong. Until this moment, except during my night's anguish at the loss of the time machine, hope of escape had kept me going. But hope was dashed by these new discoveries. The first independent clause, until this moment hope of escape had kept me going, is split and the subordinate clause has been dropped into it. We call this a drop-in clause or an embedded clause, and the commas separate it, just like brackets would. The subordinate clause draws attention to the speaker's anguish because of his loss of the time machine. Despite this, hope has kept him going. The next independent clause has the opposite idea of hopes being dashed. In our final example, we're going to look at how the author emphasises his ideas as opposed to the ideas of a character in a story. Here, Scrooge is looking at a dead body on a bed. The reader knows that the body is Scrooge, but Scrooge doesn't. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon the bed, and on it, looted and alone, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. This time, instead of one embedded subordinate clause, we have two. The first independent clause is "a pale light fell straight upon the bed." It suggests a higher power is shining a straight light upon the bed, almost like a spotlight, and this focuses the attention of Scrooge and of course the reader on the bed. It's also an important moment in the novel. The embedded subordinate clause, rising in the outer air, connects the light to something outside the room. This develops the idea that a higher power is controlling this action. The second independent clause, "on it," that's the bed, "was the body of this man," is just as important as the first because it draws attention to the neglected body. The second embedded clause, "looted and alone, unwatched, unwept, uncared for," emphasizes its neglect. Dickens makes the point that this body has been abandoned because he wants his readers to think about their lives and their relationships with others. Dickens suggests that if you don't care about other people, when you die, no one will care about you. To summarize, a compound sentence has equally important ideas. These ideas may be about the same thing, or they might contain opposite ideas. Think about where you'll put your subordinate clause or clauses and the effect that you're trying to achieve. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to buy a copy of Mr. Bruff's Guide to Grammar, I've put the link in the description below. In the meantime, please like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you in the next video.